You have to act like a creator every day. You have no clue who and what the journey of the person is who's sitting next to you. And I wish that's something my younger self would have understood.
She sent me a bio, but I'm sure it's already outdated because it was last week and she's done a lot of things since then. But in the meantime, Ajanae Dawkins is an interdisciplinary poet, performance artist, and theologian. Through poetry, she archives her matrilineage to explore the politics of faith, grief, and intimacy between Black women. Her work is published or forthcoming in the Academy of American Poets, The Rumpus, Prairie Schooner, and many other places. Her chapbook, Blood Flecks, is the winner of the New Delta Review's 2024 Chapbook Prize. Please wait, because it just keeps going. She is also Urban Art Space's 2024 Community Artist in Residence. I hear that she's just taking over, so I don't know when her reign will be over. Neither do they, which is great. Please give a nice, warm welcome to Ajanae Dawkins.
Three things that I would tell myself as a younger poet. I wasn't asked for three, but I work in three, so I just immediately assumed that it was like going to be three things. And what I would tell myself as a younger poet was immediately a very loaded question, because the older poets did tell me all of the things I would tell myself, and I was just very hard-headed. So no one was gatekeeping the secrets. It just sometimes took a few years for the truth of some of these things to set in. So here we go. Number one, we are each other's harvest. We are each other's business. We are each other's magnitude and bond. Gwendolyn Brooks. Lesson one is the art and art journey means very little if you do not have people to share it with. People who understand your passions, your loves, your processes, the very peculiar experience of being somebody who makes, who is a creator. You have to have people in your life who understand what that means and who love you for more than the things that you make. In 2019, I went to this retreat called The Watering Hole, which was run, it's an offshoot of Canem South, incredible space for writers, especially writers of color, and Black writers. And Jericho Brown was leading the manuscript workshop. Jericho Brown's an incredible poet. If you're not familiar with him, please get familiar. And I was a part of this manuscript workshop. Sorry. I was a part of this manuscript workshop. Get in there, and there's a little cohort of us who've all brought our little books. This book I've collapsed. It doesn't exist anymore. It was not what I wanted it to be. The new version of it is actually the chapbook that is out now, or that will be out in 2025. But Jericho essentially hits us with a kind of like, look to your left and look to your right, because these are the writers that you're going to be writing with for like the next 50 years. And that was 2019. I was grown, but I was still a very like young version of myself. And so it was hard to understand the magnitude of what that meant. Since then, everybody in that cohort either has a book under contract, has won a major literary award, or has done something like really significant to shift like their career and their field. Since then, people in that cohort, I have been to their book releases. I've been to their weddings. They have designed my website We see each other at conferences and we wrap our arms around each other. We've written blurbs for each other. It's really hard to articulate how small the poetry world is, especially if you are a black poet or poet of color. And so when I say it is really the worst thing in the world for you not to embrace the community that you are in with active support, and I mean not just, when you see somebody, I mean showing up physically, taking people's work seriously, teaching them as people who are actively contributing to the canon right now because they are. The year after Jericho Brown taught us in that space and told us that he won the Pulitzer. You have no clue who and what the journey of the person is who's sitting next to you. And typically what you find is something that Fatima Ashgar said years ago, is that circles rise together. When you look at what is now, it's still very painful to say, but the late Nikki Giovanni, if you look at photos of her, it's like her and her friends were like Toni Morrison and Sony Sanchez, and like Toni Morrison said that the first person to call her to let her know about her Nobel Peace Prize was Sonia Sanchez, because those are the kinds of relationships that they have. Oprah said one of her mentors was Maya Angelou. So it is a very lonely idea for me that I would win a major poetry prize and I would not have relationships with people who would be actively invested in my journey. And I think we really underappreciate the value of friendship. So many of the institutions that we are familiar with are literally built on the back of friendship. Canem, if you're... What? Okay, shout out to Canem, one of the most prestigious literary organizations dedicated to Black poetry, was built off the back of Toy Derricotte and Cornelius Eady's friendship, and them reaching out to their friends and saying, hey, we want to run these workshops for Black poets, and let's just see who will show up. So this is just a reminder to be curious about your community, your elders, your peers, the up-and-coming artists, to operate outside of scarcity models, because it is something that will work against you, the belief that only one of you can make it, the belief that there are only enough resources for a handful of you. So that's number one. I'm going to check my time. Number two, if I didn't define myself for myself, I would be crunched into other people's fantasies for me and eaten alive. Audre Lorde. Know yourself, your desires, your ethics, your vision for your life. Obligation and fear are two of the biggest disruptors to our art. Who we feel responsible to, how we feel responsible to them, and then how we feel afraid to be perceived, deeply, deeply impact our art. As a Christian artist, I've felt this intimately. I was at one point a part of a very conservative and restrictive religious space that one of the ways that sometimes religious spaces maintain a semblance of control is by ensuring that you are being monitored. And that is something that is very, very difficult on your art, because you cannot create with the perception of who will be upset or who will think the wrong thing about me. And consequently, the art that I made in that season of my life is probably some of the worst art I've ever made. It's art that refused to say the thing plainly. It's art that refused to engage honestly with the truth of what I was interested in, which were things that kind of sat in tension with some of my religious rearing in the space I was in. I wanted to talk about desire. I wanted to talk about sexuality. I wanted to talk about the body. And the work that I have revised since then from that era has predominantly me going back and just saying the thing that I felt like I couldn't say the first time. One of my mentors, Angel Nafis, said that there is no space in poems for secrets. No, let me rephrase. She said there's no space in poems for privacy, only secrets. Meaning, if there's something that you feel like is a private part of your life, then you need to not be writing about it because it's evident to the reader. But there is space for a juicy secret or two. Part of the reason my work was failing at this point in time is because I didn't know myself. I didn't know my desires. I was out of touch with my desires because my desires were what I was told by the church my desires should be. And the desires were off limits. A lot of the desires that I actually felt were off limits by the church. But the issue with that is that if you do not know what you want, you cannot build the life of your dreams. If you do not know what you want, you cannot build the art of your dreams. If you do not know what you want, you will find yourself coveting the success of other people who have gained things that you do not even want, who are living lives that you do not even want. And so knowing yourself and your desires intimately is what allows you to not only dream for yourself, but build work that is centered in your wanting. Lastly, last quote is, unfortunately, I cannot find who said this. I've looked everywhere, but the quote is that you have to act like a creator every day in everything you do. Don't just read, write. Don't just listen, speak. Don't just take, give. The world is built around mindless, endless, self-consuming consumption. You must resist it at all cost, or your life will flash by in a shadow of who you could have been. Take inspiration, but through the lens of output. Once you make the shift, your life changes forever. You finally escape the sky-painted walls you've been trapped inside. Then you make things relentlessly, obsessively, and you wonder how you went so long without realizing that you always could. Wish I knew who said that. But the last thing I would tell my younger self is that there is no right moment or right condition for creating. I spent a long time waiting for the right moment to make something in the way that I thought would be perfect. Once I had studied enough, once I had dreamed enough, once I had enough money, once I was thin enough to look good on camera, once my makeup was done well. And there's no such thing as that. Now sometimes I literally get a line while I'm teaching my students and will pause my entire classroom just so I can write it down, because I know that this is the Spirit feeding me, because I know that I exist in a constant state of being a creator and of working as a creator, and it's changed everything about how I approach my life as an artist. Poetry for me is now a lens more than it is simply a thing I do, meaning my chapbook is coming out and my chapbook is poems. But I was like, wow, these poems are also films. the way that I want my audience to engage with these poems. The advertising campaign that I came up with as a result of the book is also its own creative vision that I have that is centered in the way that I imagine a world around poetry. The way that I build anything is through understanding that there is no limit to the access of like creative energy that I have. And I wish that's something my younger self would have understood. My younger self, I learned about poems through a program called Inside Out Literary Arts Project. And I'm gonna stop this because this is my last point. But I learned through poems through a project called Inside Out Literary Arts Project. And thankfully, they had me studying poetry in that space. So it was 15, 16, 17 studying sestinas and sonnets and all kinds of things. But my introduction to the world of my engagement with poetry was through slam. And so for a long time, I believed that my career as a poet would exist in a 3-minute and 10-second time frame. And then I went to the University of Wisconsin-Madison on a full ride scholarship where they had a big focus on hip-hop theater. And I was like, oh, I could do a whole play of these. And I was like, cool, so I do one-woman shows and slam. And then I got my first residency at an exhibition space. And I was like, I make visual art. And then my husband became a filmmaker and was like, my camera is your camera and my eyes are your eyes and my vision is your vision. And I was like, we make films. And I wish a younger version of me would have thought to imagine a creative life for myself beyond the example of what I had been taught, beyond the forms of what I had been taught, because I would have began experimenting a long time ago. So, in summary, community, knowing yourself, and being a creator in everything. Thank you.
That no one has said anything to us, but we just have that thing inside of our head that makes us think, I don't know if I'm good enough. When they don't want us, that's when it really plays a role on our self-esteem. It's something that I've always done in my own spare time, but it's not something I've always shared with people. I am very lucky to be able to be in the same room with poets that I look at and consider to be the pinnacle of what poetry is. I'm a firm believer in something that Ajanae spoke about, is understanding that we right now are the voices and the poets and the ones that carry on tradition. We just have to recognize that, and we have to work within our own communities. As we've lost Nikki Giovanni, I know who's going to continue the work of Nikki Giovanni, and they live in Columbus, Ohio. So what's interesting about my journey with poetry is something that I've always done in my own spare time, but it's not something I've always shared with people. Not because I didn't want to, I just always had this back and forth conversation with myself about, I know poets, I'm not a poet. They're poets, not me. I don't write like they write. I write like I write, but I don't write what they write. They on stage. I'm not a poet. So that was the battle that I always had when it came to, should I do this or should I not? I remember the very first poem that I wrote in 4th grade. You know, I thought I was a little bit more mature than every single person in the world, especially the kids in my class, right? And we had this person come, and they wanted us to write poems. And I'm like, you know, I might be a little bit too deep. I don't know if y'all gonna understand if I write a poem. You know what I'm saying? Like, y'all ain't gonna be able to really understand it. So I loved rain. So I wrote a poem about rain. I don't remember anything else except for the part where I thought I was extra deep. And it went, you may be sad, but when it rains, you start to feel calm and you feel no pain. I was like, bruh, I think I'm I'm a poet. I think I'm a poet. I really do. But once again, I think something we all go through is transitional periods where life demands us to do different things creatively or work, life, whatever it is. So it was something that I didn't think too deeply about. In 7th grade, there was this teacher I did not like, despised her, disgusted. To this day, I don't like this woman. But to this day, man. But I knew to make her leave me alone, I had to do something that she liked. She loved poetry. So what I did was I wrote this poem about black motherhood. Because I looked at all the things that she was talking about with us. She was like this. She was serious about blackness and taking over the system and everything. But she would kind of like not try to go too deep. But I started reading deep into it. And she was so militant with us. I'm like, dang, can we learn about the stuff in class, please? But I was like, I'm going to write something that's going to make this woman feel like I see and I understand, and more than likely, after I do that, she won't treat me the way she treats me, or she won't speak to me the way she speaks to me that makes me feel the way I feel. So I had wrote that poem and shared it with her, and what was interesting was after that day, everything changed between us. I still didn't like her, but she liked me a little bit more. And I was like, dang, I did that with a poem. In 7th grade, I was like, that's okay, I think I might be a poet. Once again, life happens and we start to dive into different creative endeavors and whatnot. We get pulled in so many different directions. There's a lot of things that I never intended to do. But what happens is you figure it out, you start making sense of it, and before you know it, you're pulled in those directions. So, through video is something that I do. I've been able to partner with Mathias a few times. Photography is something that I do as well. The way video started was because I had a teens group. One of the young men in my group was murdered. When he was murdered, I told the church where I volunteered that I want a camera so I can document all of the stories of the young men. Because the last thing I want is for someone's story to not be told. If we're trying to document and get the stories out there, we have to capture it. We can't just let it die, right? So I did that, and then I started to get into photography. And after photography started to take off, people were asking me if I could come and speak about the things that I was documenting. And I'm like, well, I ain't a speaker. I don't know what to say. I said, yo, I ain't got no training. I ain't been in no speech classes. But the first speech that I gave about the documentaries that I was creating about the young men was on the TEDx stage. So a person with no training that had no intentions on doing anything of that nature, just by following the path that I was on, opened up that door for me to make it to the TEDx stage because people saw what I was doing. And they thought, this belongs somewhere where people are going to hear it, right? Same thing with video. I really didn't have the deepest intentions on doing anything with video, but I just wanted to document things that mattered to me. And there was a time with, what they called? The Sundance Film Festival. Came to Columbus, Ohio. My film was selected to be a part of the Sundance Film Festival project. So, my film was selected to be a part of the Sundance Film Festival here in Columbus.
It was.
No intentions. I did submit. Didn't think too deeply of it, but it was selected. And I said, well, dang, all right, I guess I'm pretty decent at some stuff. All right. So, around 2016, maybe, 17, I went to a place called Writer's Block. And I believe this is the first time I met Jeff as well. I went to, and I was just trying to check the place out, see what was going on. What was interesting was, what was different was this was a place where poets wanted to be. It wasn't about trying to compete. It wasn't about trying to sound the best. I recognized quickly that this is home for some people. You see people from all over the city coming to this space, respecting this space and loving this space. And as I was about to leave, Scott, where you going, Dante? I'm like, damn. I'm leaving. I had to leave to go to DC, right, to do some speaking. And he's like, you gonna get up here and, do some poems or something? I'm like, nah, I'm gonna leave that to y'all. This is what y'all do. Y'all are professionals. I'm just somebody here just watching. He was like, all right. And when I had left, I started to ask myself, well, am I a poet? Is this a moment or chance for me to dive back into the idea and concept of being a poet? And the battle, once again, with that is trying to figure out what makes a poem a poem. When should you speak up and feel like you are a poet? And you'll start to also compare yourself to other poets. You'll see somebody that's published and you'll say, well, I'm not published, so maybe my art isn't as good as somebody else's. You start going through this process of breaking yourself down, trying to figure out when is the perfect moment for me to speak up, utilize my voice, and even if I do utilize my voice, can I come up with a perfect combination of words that people will enjoy or embrace? And I feel like that's where we have this wall that we create, that no one has said anything to us, but we just have that thing inside of our head that makes us think, I don't know if I'm good enough. I don't know if I fit in. I don't know if I'm skilled enough. The beautiful chaos that exists in poetry isn't about following the rules, it's about breaking the rules of language. It doesn't matter how you structure it. It doesn't matter how you put it together. Whatever you come up with can be considered a poem. There's different ways to do it, but you can do it however you see fit. And I think in our journeys, we forget that part. And I think that was something that was my battle as I was trying to figure out, I don't know, y'all. I'm just not. But there was no one that ever told me I wasn't a poet. If you go in a room full of poets and say you're not a poet, you know how offended they get? You're like, I'm not really a poet. They're like, hey, bro. But the different mediums that I had spoke about, all of those things led me closer to poetry. Like the project I did with Mathias, what we did was we documented musicians and poets and people that play instruments, anything of that nature. So sometimes we feel like we've gotten so far away from something we want to do. And I'm speaking to people that want to get into poetry and feel like, man, I don't have the time. I don't know if I'm going to be able to invest the energy and effort into it because I'm in this space. But you can utilize different mediums or different spaces to find your way back to or what you want to do. I have footage of poets. I was not there as a poet, but I can look at the things that they said. I can look at their drive. I can study them and prepare myself for the moment I'm going to be called on stage or to show up as a poet, right? So you don't have to necessarily feel like you're so far away from the things that you want to do. Did anyone ever watch Doug before, the cartoon? Listen, okay. One of my favorite episodes is, I don't know if y'all remember this one, where Doug had his outfit, right? And then they was like reading a fashion magazine or something. And then the outfit changed and everybody was wearing the outfit that Doug was wearing. And he was like, y'all wearing my outfit, bro. And everybody like, man, that's a nice outfit. He's like, I've been wearing this all day, every day, bros. Come on now. And then next week, the magazine or whatever, it said the style now is his friend Skeeter. His friend Skeeter outfit. That was like, man, Doug, you still wearing the outfit from last week, bro? You're like, damn, bro. This is who who I am. I'm comfortable and content with who I am, and this is me. I'm not going to sit here and change and shift everything about myself just to fit in. I feel like when it comes to trying to find a place for our poetry, it's very similar to that. The trick that we play on ourselves is we feel our poetry is valid when it's embraced by everyone, or when it's published, or when it's in a space where it can be broadcasted for everyone to see, or if it's just like the flavor of the moment, right? And there's nothing wrong with reaching those heights with your poetry. However, when we provide so much power and give away something that's so personal to us and feel like it only exists in matter when it's in the hands of a major magazine or publisher, when they don't want us, that's when it really plays a role on our self-esteem and causes us to question again, are we poets? Do my words matter? Are they good? But sometimes spaces and institutions aren't looking for poetry. They're just looking for a poem in the moment. So if you do make it to that space and environment, you have to remain even more confident, because just like Doug, when the fashion changes and there's a new political occurrence going on, or there's something going on in the world that they want to address, your poems no longer fit the narrative of what they want. It might be something else now. And if you put so much power into that now you're questioning, well, dang, how did I make it to this point? But now it seems like nobody really messing with my poetry like that. I don't get it. You have to create for yourself. You have to trust your creativity. Because when you trust your creativity, you give yourself a chance to create for other people and do what matters to you. More than likely, the environment that you come from, the space that you grew up in, the experiences that you've been through, other people have been through it too. Your story coincides with other people's stories. So the words that you project into the atmosphere are sometimes the same words and feelings that other people have. So it's not about tricking yourself into becoming this best top 10 poet. It's about giving yourself a chance to just say what is legitimately on your heart and the words that you want to say. Not trying to say what fits, not trying to say what you think everyone loves, but what do you love? How do you fit inside of yourself? When you write, what version of yourself is writing? How do you give that version of yourself space to write without stopping that version of yourself is thinking what other people want from you? When you find that, and when you allow that to be the part of you that writes, you may get published, you may not. You may write a book, you may not. But the most important part is giving yourself a chance to feel the gift that you have, to hear the words that you have, and you get to decide if you share that with people or if you keep it to yourself. You have not failed. You have not done anything wrong. You are not a horrible poet. You are someone that has words that you came up with that you get to decide if you share it or if you don't. And anything else that happens beyond that is pretty much extra. That's how I see it. So with that being said, I want everyone to understand that I am accepting applications to the Part-Time Poet Association. If you're not a poet that is constantly out and about doing poems, that's okay. We got space for you here. I do poems every maybe 4 or 5 years or so. And that's it. That's all you're going to get from me. And that's okay. I don't feel bad about it. But always know that when you're ready, you can. Thank you.
So make that last line memorable. Point I realized it's not about me, it's that they just didn't like the poems. I don't know that you ever really stopped learning how to be a better poet. Coming up is a poet who is very adamant that I use the word former with him. So this is the former presidents of the Ohio Poetry Association, which he led for more than a decade, but he insists that that time is finished. Very good. His poems have appeared in numerous journals. He's published 3 poetry collections. He's the recipient of Ohio Arts Council Individual Excellence Award in the past, but most importantly, he is spending his present with us today here. Please give a nice warm welcome to Chuck Salmons. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks to everybody for coming out today. It's a beautiful December day, and you're here indoors with us, so we appreciate it. I think we'll get out of here in time, though, to enjoy some of it. Yes. So, I am going to talk to you a little bit about living a poetic life, and what exactly does that mean, right? It can mean a lot of things, but I'm a working poet. I've heard that phrase. So I have a day job. It is not as a poet. I work for the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, and so I deal with all forms of communication on a daily basis. But poetry, I would say, is my passion. And so I've been able to incorporate it into my life in a number of different ways. And that's what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about today. We all have books on our bookshelves. Maybe you have a subscription to a daily poem that comes into your email. Maybe you go to reading events, open mics. Maybe you go to critique sessions. All of these things and more, are things that can help you have a poetic life. And the other thing I would say is that poetry probably isn't going to make you rich, but it will enrich your life in innumerable ways. And I think that's what I want to stress to you today. So what is a poetic life? Well, it's reading, writing poetry, right? It could be performing and or publishing poetry. It could be getting involved with your fellow poets or your community at large in some way. And as Jeff mentioned, I have done that mainly through the Ohio Poetry Association over the years. But it could be, those open mics or those exhibitions and things. A poetic life involves exploring and learning. I truly believe in being a lifelong learner. And so as a poet, I don't know that you ever really stop learning how to be a better poet. So, and then the other thing is taking everything you've learned and developed and passing that on to others. That community engagement is a part of this. So the poetic life is full of give and take. And that's really what my talk is going to be focusing on today, is the give and the take of that poetic life. It has highs and lows. It has successes and failures. It has productive periods and it has dry spells. I probably go through more dry spells than I go through productive periods, but that's okay. So let's talk a little bit about the give and the take of the poetic life. And I'm thinking in terms of what I wish somebody had told me, when I was really diving into poetry, which wasn't until I got to college. I came to poetry kind of late. I was, 19, 20 years old. So I had, Julia in mind a lot as I was putting this talk together. She's a mentee that I worked with recently, and it was just such a joy to do that. And I thought, okay, what are some things that maybe Julia would want to hear today as well? So the first is a take risks. I wish somebody had told me that 20 years ago. Maybe my poetry would be more further along than it is. But if you don't take the risks, you don't get the reward, right? That's the key thing to remember here. So take the risks. So I remember when I was in graduate school, in one of my poetry workshops, one of my fellow poets and fellow TAs, we were in one of our classes, and she said, "Chuck, nothing ever happens in your poems." And, it was like, it took me a moment. First of all, I'm like, wow, that's harsh. But once I really started listening, seeing her kind of flesh that out, it's like, okay, I understand exactly what she's saying. I wasn't taking any risks in my poems. And so from that point on, I tried to do that. Usually I wasn't very successful, but that's okay. And then I had another fellow poet who said, the last line of a poem should be like a first kiss. And that has always stuck with me. So make that last line memorable. And that may involve taking, some kind of risk. Later, I took some risks when, I wrote a poem about Alice Carpenter's Monotype, and I sent it to her. And then all of a sudden we strike up a friendship. I start seeing more of her work. I start writing more poems. And before you know it, I get a book, right? So all because I took that chance of sending that poem to her and say, your art inspires me. Can I see more of it? How do I see more of it? And then, there are just all these other moments I was thinking back on where it's like, okay, I took a chance and it worked out. Go to open mics, go to the events, you may be scared to death to get up in front of that audience, but you'll regret it probably if you don't at some point. So on the flip side of that, there's a give, and that is give yourself a break. Okay. When things don't turn out as you hoped or maybe as you envisioned, it's okay. Artists, like a lot of people, maybe more than most people, put pressure on ourselves. We want our artwork out there. We want it to be in front of people. We want people to read our poems. We want people to see our paintings. We want people to hear our music. And so we can be very hard on ourselves if that doesn't work out. So we got to give ourselves a break every now and then. Not every risk you take is going to work out, but examine what didn't work out and learn from it. The next take rejection. It's going to come. Probably more than the acceptances, right? We've all gotten that, if you submitted poems somewhere, you've gotten that rejection letter. Thank you for sending us your poems. We appreciate the chance to read them, but we have not selected these for publication. We wish you luck in placing these poems elsewhere. Yeah, maybe move on to another journal after that. We've all probably gotten those. I mean, there are so many familiar faces in here. I know you folks are writing poems or publishing them, and so I'm sure you've gotten those rejections. But don't take it personally. It's not. They're not assessing you as a person. They're assessing you as they're assessing the poems, right? And that's something that was hard for me when I was young. I took it so personally. And then some certain point I realized it's not about me. They just didn't like the poems. Not all editors have the same taste, right? And so that's a big part of this. So flipping it, there's a give, and that is give yourself second chances, right? Maybe you can tell by the rejection letter that, yeah, maybe I shouldn't send back to that journal, but keep doing it. Keep doing it anyway. Reread maybe what those journals have been publishing. Check against what you've been writing. Maybe check your backlog of poems. Maybe there's something you wrote a few years before that never got the light of day, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, they might like this poem. Revise it, resubmit, enter that contest again. Give yourself second chances, third chances, fourth chances. If you're going to open mics, maybe you read a poem and it kind of falls flat. All right, go back and practice. Where can you work on that reading? And then go back to that open mic. Share that poem again. It's the only way you're going to grow. Take advice. The poetry community, in my experience, is extremely supportive. I don't remember ever meeting a poet who wouldn't be willing to give me some time and to talk through maybe some questions or some ideas that I had. And, especially here, I think in Central Ohio, we have so many avenues and there's so many ways to reach out to poets who are highly published, highly respected, who perform well at the microphone. So seek them out if you have questions or you want new ideas. These folks know what they're talking about. But more importantly, they're just really supportive. More than anything, they want you to see you succeed as well as a poet. And then you can kind of take that advice, take it back home with you, think about it, digest it, and see how you can apply it to your own work. After you do that, give thanks. Be grateful for the support that you get from others, for the advice that you get from others. Be grateful to those journals or those venues where you're able to read and perform. Give credit where it's due. These are people who are helping you, be successful. And it shows a lot of integrity if you do that, if you acknowledge that. And do it publicly. Do it in person at that microphone, put it on your social media, put it in print that you get that book published, right? Give thanks, show that gratitude. I have, so many people over the years who have been supportive of me, and I can't thank them enough for everything they've done for me. Take care of yourself and of others. So one of my favorite poets, one of the poets who really got me thinking about trying to write poems that honor my working class background, was Philip Levine. And in an interview, he explained that, one of the things that he does is he doesn't eat too much. He doesn't drink too much. He gets plenty of sleep. He exercises. So he takes care of himself, right? That could also mean your mental health, your spiritual health. So you can take care of yourself in those ways as well, whatever that means, right? But take the steps to do that. But take care of those others that are in your life as well, right? Like my wife, Beth, has been extremely supportive of my poetry endeavors, and I probably couldn't do half the stuff that I'm able to do without her. So I'm extremely grateful to her. So I try to remember to do things. Maybe I don't always do it, but I try to remember to do things, for her, to show her my love and appreciation for her support. I'm the kind of person, if I'm asked to get involved with something or to take on a project, I want to say yes, right? That's typically what I want to do, because I'm like, yes, this is poetry. This is, we want to get this out into the community. Yes, I would love to do it, but it's okay to say no. That's part of taking care of yourself, is knowing when, I just got too much right now, and I'm going to have to, respectfully say no. That's something else I wish I had learned a number of years ago, was how to say no. And I'm sure Beth could attest to that. Give your time. In recent years, I worry that, especially in our country, we become a nation of too much me and not enough we. And so, I strongly believe in trying to get active in the community. That's what, one of the things I love about being involved with OPA is that I get to get involved with communities, all around the state. I've been doing this with OPA, for almost 20 years now. And it's offered me some of the most rewarding experiences of my life, quite frankly. And it's because I've been able to connect with people, with communities. I get to mentor young poets like Julia over here, or for beginning poets. Volunteerism is kind of in my blood. And so if it's not necessarily in your blood, well, you might be surprised at how much you like it if you get involved. Part of it for me is you get to see the power that poetry plays in people's lives. I've worked with inmates, children, it's just wonderful. It's just wonderful. Take what comes. I mentioned earlier about, these dry spells that you might go through as a writer. Don't fret about them. I've learned that, over the years that I just go through these spells myself. Take those dry spells and maybe do some different things. If you have a backlog of poems that haven't been published, maybe they need revised. Well, that's the time to do that. If you're not writing, touch your poetry in some other way. Work on a manuscript, right? Work on revising. Maybe even, I don't know, just jot down a few lines and then put them aside. You don't have to be, writing every day to still be in that zone. You could submit to contests. You could judge a contest, right? That might be another way to stay in touch with the poetic community. We were talking to Laurent earlier. We were talking about, just write, to get rid of the distractions. And, Tom York, the lead singer for the band Radiohead, keeps journals. He'll just write down lines that come to mind. And then half the time, some point in the future, the songs that you hear on those Radiohead albums just came from him putting these lines together. So you never know, you may not get a whole poem, but you get that one line. Well, write it down, get it down, because it'll go away. It won't stay with you forever. Be open to opportunities, no matter how strange or weird they might sound, or maybe you think, oh, I don't know if I'd be a good fit for this. Be open to it. Take it. Take what comes. I kind of have a little bit of a Zen-like approach to that. So those are the gives and the takes as I see them from living a poetic life. What do you get out of it? Well, I've talked a little bit about this, but you're going to want to share your work in some way, right? So publishing is kind of that's the traditional way, although we have all these different avenues now to publish. You've got online journals, you still have traditional prints. There's YouTube, right? You could perform your work. I've been fortunate to see my poems alongside, poets I love and respect, like, Roy Bentley and Steve Abbott, Ricky Santer, and, there are poets in this room. But then also, some that I was surprised about, oh, here's my poem in Chiron Review. Here's Marge Pearson, wow, that's pretty cool. So that's kind of, that's one of the possibilities from immersing yourself in a poetic life. Lifelong relationships. This is probably my favorite. I just have developed so many friendships, and my fellow Winks are in the room today, Ricky Santer and Sandy Thien. There's another example of a risk that we took to form this trio and to go around and gig, right? We still don't have that microbus to ride around in, but maybe we'll get there at some point. But we've had such a rewarding experience of being together, growing as friends, growing as poets. And, that relationship that I had with the two of them has just nourished me, like you wouldn't believe. My monthly poetry group that we're a part of, the Bistro Poets, that's another example. And then of course, all the work through OPA has really, been so rewarding. Serving your community. I keep going back to this, but I can't stress just how rewarding that is. If you make that a part of your poetic life in some way, that's the enrichment part. It's going to be spiritually or mentally enriching in a lot of ways. You're also going to continually learn and grow if you do these things. I've become a better poet, but I've also feel like I've become a better, leader, because of my work. And not just in the poetry community. I took, a lot of those experiences being on the board at OPA, I was able to actually put into my day job as well, and to be a better manager of my team. And so that is something that, it's just been very rewarding, kind of in another way that was sort of unexpected. And then finally, you're going to get a lot of joy out of this life. And some of you probably already do. And I don't necessarily mean because you're going to, make a lot of money or get famous or whatever, but you're going to get a lot of joy from the artistic endeavors that you get involved with, whether that's solo or part of a group or an exhibition. You're going to develop friendships that will last you a lifetime. You're going to, reap a lot of joy from the shared accomplishment of being part of a group. We just had our capstone celebration for the Ohio Underground Railroad Whistle Stop Poetry Tour last Saturday. And as, that was hard work. It took a lot of time and took a lot of effort, but man, and I think those of you who were there last Saturday will attest what an experience and what a way to wrap up that project. And that's all because we got to work together towards that common goal. And so it was just amazing. So, even when I'm stressed, right, planning things like that or emceeing or whatever it is, I'm still having the time in my life because I'm living that in poetic life. That's it. That's all I have.
Some of the names have been altered to protect the guilty. But it's funny because there was a version of myself that didn't curse at all. There was a version of me that identified as a middle child, as a witness, as a very, very, very terrible rapper. What you additionally have to know is that...
Up next is a man, seemingly wonderful husband, but very, very wonderful husband, just had to check. A poet, an impersonator, a short filmmaker, and most days my right-hand man, and I really appreciate that.
That's so special.
Don't tell Greg I said that, okay? I have a twin brother, so we don't got to tell him. I'm super excited just seeing him dive into journeys that are very similar to mine in terms of starting own businesses, in terms of approaching art and creativity from an entrepreneurship perspective. And I'm super excited to hear what he's going to enlighten all of us with. Please give a nice warm welcome to Mathias Jackson.
My name is, as Jeff said, Mathias, but my name is really Matthew.
What?
If you're in the poetry community, it's like Mathias J. If you're like a model, an actor, or a client that I've worked for or worked with, it's Matty with the Cam. It's Matty with the Cam Films on YouTube. I entered the poetry community in like 2012. But in order to really get my perspective, maybe we have to go back to my days as a young and absolutely normal-sized headed Jehovah's Witness. Now, I don't know if you know all about the things they do and don't do, like smoking or standing out, mother freaking cursing, making jokes about anything faith-related. But what you have to know about growing up as a Jehovah's Witness is that uniformity is a virtue. Men wear suits to the Kingdom Hall, and if you're feeling especially rebellious, you wear the suit and then just took the jacket off. On Sundays, we have like regular service, which is just like a 45-minute talk, not a sermon. And I must emphasize, a man is literally just talking to you from a podium. The spontaneous amen and catching up the Spirit is not only absent, but punishable by, honestly, I don't know how they would punish that because it just never happened. Now, after this, you'd have a discussion around monthly given reading materials called Watchtowers, all sandwiched between 3 single harmony musical arrangements that are, like their component speaking portion, completely sauceless in nature. Now, what you additionally have to know is that Sundays were like the playoffs. Only the people that have really been putting up numbers and triple doubles get to play in those. Mostly what is called elders and sometimes what's called a ministerial servants. These positions don't really have to mean that much to you as a diverse audience on a Saturday afternoon. I was not one of those things. Tuesdays were a bit of an audible though. Tuesdays would kind of be like NBA training camp, where like we'd run drills and have people give pre-assigned readings. They would give a pre-selected selection from the Jehovah's Witness Bible, and if you're advanced enough, you got to do these talks where you developed an opening, then you read from the Jehovah's Witness Bible, and then you gave a closing after that. The first time I stood alone in a bright mahogany suit in front of a crowd of 210 people and gave this particular kind of talk, I was 7 years old, and I know what you're thinking. Bright mahogany? This color does not exist. Mahogany is a shade of brown, and once you get bright, it's really getting into chestnut or beige territory. And for that, I thank you for your attention to detail. But you missed when I said audible in the last paragraph, which is a football reference surrounded by what was clearly a basketball metaphor. But Tuesdays were kind of like practicing for the World Series. I would prepare these talks and then knock them out the field. I was always kind of okay with extemporaneous speaking. Now, for what passes for a solid poet, I do okay. But for what passes as a 7-year-old Jehovah's Witness in an ambiguously brown suit, I was basically Jesus, if that wasn't clearly blasphemy. I actually really loved giving those talks. I got so good at it that I could write a whole talk Tuesday morning and give the talk Tuesday night. I kind of liked the rush. My mom said it was because I was a middle child. And I just love the attention. And the fact that I just made up that quote for this talk today kind of proves it right. Middle children are often the peacekeeping, people-pleasing, attention seekers the Bible really makes them out to be. Here's a poem about the first unfortunate one of us middle children, arguably the first follower of Jesus. The Origins of Yelling Jesus Christ in Shock, written by Jesus' younger brother, Tanner. Not all of us could get into the Messianic carpentry game. Some of us had to be practical. I started a wine vineyard. My psychiatrist says it's because I'm a middle child, and grapes are pretty much the middle children of the fruit world. People either step on us or leave us out to dry. It's called Tanner's Juices. We make cups too. The Holy Grail collection is quite popular. I don't get that much press, not when Jesus is over here resurrecting people. And Lazarus wasn't even the fun cousin. Anyways, for all the people that you could have worshipped, I'm joking, that's part of the joke. Of course you worship Jesus, he's Jesus. The firstborn of all creation, the firstborn. Not for nothing, but not the best roommate. Stayed up late every night praying to God. Hey, guess what? You're already here. The real joke is that guy doesn't even get his own room. I mean, it's a 2.5 bath ranch style in a fair neighborhood in Bethlehem. Give him his own space. I mean, he's your savior. I kid, but you know, he never called mom. It was always Mary with this guy. Sure, he's the son of God, but it really speaks to his state of mind. Say what you want about Joseph, but that guy was here. And he got Mary pregnant the old-fashioned way, corporeal style. You know, they say he turned water into wine at a wedding. That we crashed. It was a house red. House of my father. That was back-to-back punchlines, no fish and loaves, but solid effort, you understand. We're all pretty in the spirit. It's hard to get the Lord that way, but it was a good occasion. Jesus just signed a lease on a new donkey. I told him the interest rates were going to crucify him in 3 years, and he's all like, don't worry. I got that covered. So everyone's getting pretty drunk, and the wine runs out. We all got this stupid water, which this guy once used to drown the whole planet, but nobody's ready for that conversation. I bring in the reserve wine from my private vineyard. It's a smooth, oaky Christmas Cabernet. Yeah, celebrating Jesus' birthday was a whole thing back then, too. The bride and groom share a deep pour into a single glass. His eyes glaze and come back alive again. When a man is in the mind to propagate, he's pulling the spirit from the vine and laying it pulled in underneath the bare feet. The sum of all want is in the chalice, and then it's not. This would be the event that put Tanner's juices on the map. I mean, for what passes as the map nowadays. The groom swallows long with an exultation, satisfying He reviews it ready at the depth, and it passes for what he reviews it at the depths and what passes for review nowadays, and it's at the tip of his tongue. And he's all like, Jesus Christ! Did you make this? The first poem that I actually ever performed at an open mic was not ran by a Jehovah's Witness, was not that at all. It would be several years before I could really channel the spirit in that particular way. No, I went to an open mic called Writer's Block, and at an event that an even then legend, but I didn't know it yet, by the name of Scott Woods, called me to the mic for my first time. And with excitement and confidence that I promise you was misplaced, I adjusted the mic and straightened my vest and button-up shirt and jean combo, and I rapped. What will astonish no one is that I actually was not the first person to perform that night. So you can imagine me watching everyone else go up on the mic with these heartfelt love poems, these sestinas, these sonnets, and the whole time I'm thinking, these niggas never even heard of rap. I'm about to blow their freaking minds. But what was crazy is like I kind of rapped like a Jehovah's Witness would rap. It still has to go to the Canem later on that night. I was dressed like one too. Like a Jehovah's Witness meets an extra from The Wire. I'll clarify. It's like a 2000s Taye Diggs. I'll clarify again. It's like a current day Neo. No more clarifications. I kept writing poems, and eventually I left the Jehovah's Witness faith. I kept writing poems and got married to a poet. I met at a regional poetry slam. I only wear suits on special occasions now, and I only finished writing this talk at 7 a.m. today. This poem is entitled, "The Time They Let the Dog Out in the Ministry." Some of the names have been altered to protect the guilty. But Brother Jones ran a 5-second 40 when he was 23, and I was a damn it in a single-bedroom apartment over a dollar store pregnancy test. He challenged his record this autumn Saturday morning under a dying maple with heavy winds on a marsh post-night thunderstorm terrain and a corduroy jacket, quite top-heavy, no less. A brown and black boxer inside of her prime met us on the porch, its master absconded into the dark recesses of his home, and the dog and us share a shock. We are here, in prison. Paul wrote to the Christians in Philippi, "Beware of dogs," a portent to this particular ministry day. This Old Testament canine searching for the place her judgment would baptize and make whole. My father recites a time a dog launched at him across a jungle gym where his youth was even before my own. And he was just a damn it away from me not writing this poem at this very moment. I'm seeing through his eyes now how to stay alive, how to carry the word of God. Brother Jones was an old hat at the getaway, saving paradise for another time. In the safety of the car, he asks me how it felt to have lived through the ordeal. As he struck not interested on the service note, when they let the dog loose in the ministry, I thought it could be worse. I could have cursed just now. All that to say is that sometimes I'm cursing in my poems now. But it's funny because there was a version of myself that didn't curse at all. There was a version of me that identified as a middle child, as a witness, as a very, very, very terrible rapper. A husband, best friend, an introvert, talk writer, storyteller, filmmaker, documentarian, interviewer, so on and so on and so on. And when I started, I said the hardest thing about writing a poem is trying to work out who's writing it. And my advice to my younger self is that when writing your poems, try to bring everyone along.
I didn't really figure out how to write a love poem for at least 8-10 years. So it's tough to figure out your own voice and your own voice within a very, very specific subject. And it's just called stubbornness and luck. We're going to begin with something I'm super, super excited to say. I don't get to say this enough. This first talk is a fellow Canem poet. Maybe you didn't hear that. This next first talk is a fellow Canem poet. He is a professor of poetry over at OSU. His poems and his photographs. If you haven't seen his photographs, talk to him about film. I don't know much about film, but he does. So you can talk to him all about black and white photos and things like that. Appeared in publications like the American Poetry Review, the New Yorker, New York Times Magazine. His second poem of books, Pardon My Heart, from Northwestern University Press, was released in 2018. Mathias Jackson lives in Ohio with his wife and child, who are both wonderful people. Please give a nice, warm welcome to Marcus. Hey everyone. Thank you all for being here. Big thanks to Jeff and to Versus. Big thanks to the museum. Every time I'm in this space, it seems like good things and healing happen. I want to give a shout out to my son, who it's his birthday weekend. That's why I got a boogie early. He's having a party that I got to run to. I love the subject for today. It's very practical, the word advice. And I think about how to stay in the writing life a lot. And it really just comes down to stubbornness and luck, which I originally wrote about for the Southern Review a few years back when my second book was coming out, and I still feel the same way. I'm going to read from that piece, but essentially, I began writing poetry when I was 14. And most people, when they start writing poetry, will write about love or loss. I was writing about love because my heart had been broken. I was an emo teenager. I promise it wasn't my fault why my heart got broken. And I just kind of dove into writing poems because my sister, who was really the alpha sibling of the two of us, we're only a year apart. And she's a badass. And when I got my heart broken, she's like, since you're too sensitive to confront the person that your former beloved is now dating, why don't you just write her a poem? She said it kind of jokingly, but I took it sincerely, so that's how I got into poetry. Of course, my poems were so bad, right? And I didn't really figure out how to write a love poem for at least 8-10 years. And then about 25 years later, I published what I consider as an entire book of love poems. So I'm going to read a piece of prose I wrote about those subjects. And it's just called Stubbornness and Luck. And I might read a poem. I might read a grown-up love poem. I wrote too many bad teenage love poems, so maybe I'll read a grown-up love poem. At age 14, I wrote my first poem, an awful sequence of rhyming couplets that I originally began in a half-baked attempt to convince a schoolmate to leave the guy she was sleeping with and resume dating my bleak, virginal self. Aside from yielding a horrible poem, and aside from drawing no response at all from the former girlfriend whom I cherished, the writing and revision process, during the few days I labored over the ridiculous drafts, changed me permanently. even though the actual lines and sentences ended up being hogwash in each iteration. My commitment to sitting down with paper and pen for multiple sessions was a crucial contradiction to the types of behaviors in which society expected me to partake. The future plans most of my friends and I had, plans we had inherited from our factory city's terse mantras or parameters, were to keep developing our jump shots and our sprinting speed, to earn athletic scholarships to any college willing to sniff us, or to try and stay felony free until we could slide from high school into pension-crowned jobs at the Jeep and Chrysler plants, where many of our kin and community members toiled. I composed and revised that paltry first poem in the Burger King 2 blocks from where I lived. Those days, half of the dining area bore signage proclaiming smoking. I ordered fries, took my tray to a window table, lit one of my Newport 100s, and commenced to poem making. The importance of the experience resided mainly in the surrounding intricate details. The restaurant was not busy, and the people working a shift moved about their stations and assignments with an earned ease. It was winter. The evening's final angles of sunlight came through the glass and gave a forthright grace to my menthol smoke. The long dispenser of fountain sodas whirred, sometimes rumbling while generating or resettling interior stocks of ice. A couple of times, I noticed other patrons looking at me with a slight disorientation that broke quickly into glancing elsewhere and giving me back my relative privacy. These strangers affirmed the new space, peace, and purpose into which I had wandered. Right now, 24 years removed, more years now, 24 years removed from that first poem, I'm typing all this into a laptop while I sit again before a window at a coffee shop in the core of a sizable mid-American city. Spoiler alert, it's Columbus. This time around, there are 3 strangers nearest me. 2 of them are handsome, well-cologned men, no older than 35. Overhearing everything, I ascertain that they have met to hash out, with the aid of matching iPads I assume their workplace has provided, some intricate protocol of sales-driven communique they must soon unfold into emails and calls aimed at a sector of their clientele whom they designate as, quote, high risk, high reward. Conversely, the other person seated close is alone, in her 30s, and she's reading a thick hardcover book of prose that looks to be borrowed from the university library about 10 blocks from here. In my periphery, one of her hands slowly sweeps across the new page just after she turns it, a gesture that can conjure a brief wind shifting an elm bough among the edge of a public park. The co-working men are now talking in raised tones, which carry competitiveness and perhaps a fearful bitterness. The woman reading has finished her iced coffee, and she has begun chewing each partially melted cube. The writing life is stubbornness and luck, enough of each to make ourselves available for receiving the essential vibrations the world and its people tirelessly generate. For me, the production rate of good drafts is less engulfing than presenting myself consistently as a patient witness to whatever and whoever are in proximity. Even if the folks at this cafe begin to bore or sour me, I'm going to glance out onto the sidewalk, pedestrians in the midst of a modest April day, even if none of the passers-by gives me a bit of transferable emotion. My attention will find a puddle near the curb that quivers every time another vehicle hurries toward some place that must be worthy of perceiving. So it's really just sitting down and trying and failing and figuring it out. Thank you. I'll read just one love poem. I think my son appears in this. Yeah, if I can find it. Why is it hard to write love poems? I think it's difficult to get distance from the moment, but also sometimes love is so tied up in your history with trauma, other relationships that you've experienced. It's also tied into a lot of the cliches and conditioning that mass media and mass entertainment gives us. So it's tough to figure out your own voice and your own voice within a very, very specific subject. And it took me a couple decades, but I got a couple keepers. When you begin writing about love, I think you want to make a pretty simple scene or bring the reader into a situation that they can access. And then the more and more you write about it, you realize that there's so much, in my case, history with capitalistic and empire-based violence, treachery, ladder climbing, and also a lot of familial complication. And then if you add on all the books that you end up reading or half reading, and all the artists that you truly cherish that aren't poets or aren't literature, you might get a poem that's kind of a jambalaya, that has a little bit of most of the things you've experienced, or at least really quickly represented. And this was a poem that I wrote very late in the collection when I wanted to make some type of complicated love poem. And the main, if I remember correctly, the main task I gave myself was to get Shakespeare or a Shakespearean character and Donny Hathaway into a poem at the same time. So even if the rest of the poem is trash, I'll take it. It's called Dark-Eyed Air. We're watching living Europeans dramatize the lives of dead, aestheticized Europeans. Grabbing a Monday matinee near the center of an American city in which our significantly Negro son is learning the paradoxes of sharing before lying for a nap on an assigned cot at daycare. The movie spans many foggy heaths and bleak castle expanses that look like no black folks have ever or will ever pass through. So my wife and I, sipping whiskey from a flask, watch cautiously in the empty film house, somehow feeling all the cinematic and cultural whiteness might advance from the screen across the dark ceiling and walls and swallow us. Our wariness dissolves and boredom forms. So we walk out, the avenue's urgent motion and sound renewing us. And we head for a pub with a colorful jukebox that holds plenty of Donny Hathaway, a man whose mind, like Macbeth's, was full of scorpions, a man who, unlike Macbeth, made music sure to stir my wife and me, until we must gather ourselves, pay for our frank drinks, take a full bus, and retrieve our son, dark-eyed heir to all the streets and songs this kingless land sustains. Thank you.